I'm McCaskill. I'd like to see more young people getting involved. But ask her that if you want to. Because you ain't going to get another chance. Other questions that we'd like to ask?
About women's rights and domestic violence.
So I assume she's against women being accused. So, okay. We'd ask her a question like, what kinds of things can be done? Has she seen progress over the years? Blah, blah, blah. Raise your hand if you didn't get one of these sets of questions. Erwin will come around and give it to you. All right. Chase, put you on the spot. What question would you like to ask Senator McCaskill? Hey.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Just came off the highway, so, but, you know, and I did a bad thing. I talked and worked all the way on the highway, which I shouldn't have done. I've got kids. In fact, my youngest daughter is going to be 16 this weekend. I lecture her about not using her cell phone while she's driving, and then, of course, I use mine the whole way while I was driving, and so I was setting a bad example. Listen, I think it's important. I know you guys have a lot of questions, and I know that we only have until 3 o'clock. And so rather than me talk about what I think you want to hear about, I'd much rather answer your questions. That way I know I'm talking about what you want to hear about. And so if it's okay with you, we can just open it up for questions, and I'm happy to answer anything you guys want to know about politics, campaigns, the Senate, or any other issue. I know you guys are studying a lot of stuff about international stuff. So,
and I just really want to know what your position on women's rights is, and are women living up to how they should, or. And I also want to know, what do you think about the media's image on young women? Do you think that, the media tells them to be, too promiscuous or too thin or not that?
Well, I mean, it's a big question. You know, and I've got a perspective, obviously, that has changed because, you know, when I first began doing this, I started running for office in 1982. None of you were even born then, I painfully might point out. And so when I first ran, I was young and single, and there weren't, and when I was a young assistant prosecutor in Kansas City doing criminal trials, for a long period of time when I was doing that, I was the only woman in the office. And I've been a number of times in terms of being the first woman to do things. I'm the first woman elected to the United States Senate from Missouri. I was the first woman elected prosecutor in Kansas City. So I've seen it. I've seen it, particularly when I was in the legislature as a young woman. I saw a lot of things. I had things said to me that were wildly inappropriate, frankly illegal. But I also would tell you that every time that happened to me, I just became more determined to know a lot about what I was doing. And I learned that information was really power. Knowledge was power. And I could overcome some of the sexism that was kind of in the system if I really knew what I was talking about and had a sense of humor. I think you have a choice as a woman. If there's a situation you encounter where you think maybe the playing field is not level, you have a choice. You can either, you know, complain loudly, or you can decide that you're going to do a better job and try to laugh it off. And I generally try to do a better job and laugh it off.
I know sometimes it's kind of hard to know everything about every single little issue, in the U.S. So, there's always the lobbying firms that are there for, information purposes. So, what's your opinion on, what a lobbying firm, does? What exactly does a lobbying firm do in the Senate? Because it sounds really, fishy, but.
Well, it is. It sounds fishy because it is. More importantly than the lobbying, by the time you get to the United States Senate, most people who get there, it's not the first office they've held, and they are perfectly willing to not talk to lobbyists or not pay much attention to lobbyists. The bigger problem, really, honestly, is campaign financing. All of the lobbyists work for interests that have a lot of money. Most of them do. There are some special interest groups that don't have a lot of money that have lobbyists. You know, there's a Common Cause, and there's Citizens for Less Government Waste, and there's some very good, what I call the do-gooder organizations that don't have a lot of money. They don't have near as many lobbyists. I mean, if you look, for example, one of our companies here in Missouri, Boeing. has one of the largest lobbying shops in Washington, and they have been very successful in getting a lot of defense contracts. I think most of us that are there take lobbyists. I don't see lobbyists that often. They may see some of the people on my staff, but I don't spend that much time with lobbyists. But what you really ought to be worried about, is if they write most of the big checks, those companies do, for campaigns. What you all need to really be focused on is that if we are ever really going to get some kind of, equality for the issues, if we're ever going to be as worried about AIDS as we are about making sure that there is. But keep in mind, if you study the Constitution, you understand the Commander-in-Chief. You understand the veto, right? So how many votes does it take to overturn a presidential veto? 67 votes, not 60. So whatever we do to say, President Bush, we want you to begin to pull combat troops out beginning January 1. We want you to try to have all the combat troops out by the middle of next year. He will veto, and we'd have to have 67. And we don't. The most votes we've ever gotten for a demand to change the policy in Iraq was 57. And obviously we have to have 60 just to be able to move the legislation forward to get past the bill. I certainly have voted against my party leaders more often than any other freshman senator. Just this week, I voted to sustain President Bush's veto. I voted with President Bush on the water bill that he vetoed, and then I turned around and voted against McCaskill, his nominee for Attorney General. In fact, I'm making some people say that I'm confusing people because nobody can figure out where I'm going to vote, which I think is probably a good thing. I'm really trying to look at every single issue, not from a party perspective, but from what I think is the right thing to do for the country, where we can find middle ground, and what I feel like Missourians would appreciate and understand. And Missouri is kind of in the middle. Our country is evenly divided, Missouri is evenly divided, and the Senate is evenly divided. So I feel right at home.